Leclerc's statement, admitting that life will become more difficult with Hamilton in the team, it is not just a courtesy before the arrival of a 7-time champion. It is the recognition of a technical and political scene within Ferrari that could redefine who is the true team leader in 2025. Juan Pablo Montoya, known for his openness and not decorating the words when it comes to analyzing Formula One, launched a warning that he has resonated throughout the paddock. As Ferrari adjusts the car in the style of Hamilton, life will be complicated to Charles. This is not a phrase in the air or a free prediction. It is a deep reading of what is happening within Maranello. Montoya has closely followed Ferrari's internal dynamics since Lewis Hamilton joined the team, and what he has seen is an adaptation process that, although in a slow appearance, is full of signs that indicate an imminent change in the balance of power. Lewis, who landed in Ferrari with a record that few can match, still does not feel the SF25 as a natural extension of his hands and feet. Its piloting style, refined for 2 decades in an ecosystem such as Mercedes, requires very specific adjustments that Ferrari engineers are beginning to implement meticulously. This means that, although in the first races of the Hamilton season it has not yet shown absolute dominance, the team is already working with the sight of SF25 into a car that enhances its strengths. And that, in the history of Formula One, is usually a turning point. It is not the first time that a team decides to modify the DNA of its car to favor a pilot with a proven history of championships, and almost always that process ends up tilting the balance in its favor. Fred Vasseur, director of the team, has recognized him without capujos. Both he and Hamilton underestimated the magnitude of the challenge of this transition. Lewis came with the hope of adapting quickly, trusting that his experience and his ability to interpret a car would allow him to minimize that learning period. But the reality is that the SF25 does not forgive mistakes and demands a deep understanding of its peculiarities, something that Leclerc, after years of coexistence with Ferrari, dominates almost instinctively. What Montoya has suggested is that we are in the prelude to a decisive moment. If Ferrari manages to shorten the Hamilton adaptation curve and begins to design evolutions thinking about his way of attacking the curves, managing traction and getting the maximum of the tire, the panorama for Leclerc could change drastically. What today seems a consolidated advantage for Monegasco, tomorrow could be transformed into a constant battle to maintain the #1 pilot status. And in a team with the media and historical pressure of Ferrari, that internal struggle is not simply a sports challenge. It is a political, technical, and psychological pulse that can define the course of the championship and the relationship between its 2-star pilots. The SF25, the car with which Ferrari faces the 2025 season, has not only been a challenge for Hamilton in its adaptation process, it has also been a technical puzzle for the Maranello engineers themselves. This car, a direct heir of a concept that in 2024 had shown limitations, presents a set of structural problems that cannot be solved only with small aerodynamic adjustments. The defect most indicated by analysts and experts is its lazy rear suspension, a characteristic that greatly limits the optimal operating range of the car and conditions almost all other aspects of its performance. Unlike other cars from the grille that allow greater flexibility in the configurations, the SF25 forces engineers to walk on a tightrope. Any minimal variation in the tuning can completely unbalance their track behavior. This particularity has generated a chain effect. To avoid excessive wear of the plank, the piece of wood that runs through the lower part of the car and that, by regulation, cannot be eroded beyond a limit, Ferrari has been forced to increase the filming heights. The problem is that this solution, although it prevents mechanical sanctions and damage, directly penalizes the generation of aerodynamic load, reducing the grip in curves and making the car more unstable in borderline situations. The result is a car that feels less planted in the asphalt, especially in fast curves, forcing pilots to compensate with an extra job at the wheel. And this is where Leclerc's experience has allowed him to survive better than Hamilton. Monegasco has learned to anticipate the reactions of the SF25 and handle his balance changes without wasting so much time, while Lewis is still in full process of deciphering those unpredictable reactions. Ferrari, aware of the magnitude of the problem, tried radical solutions in the development phase. Repositioning of the rear suspension arms with a variation of at least 20 mm, redesign of the aerodynamic profile of the wishbones and deep modifications in the rear braking system to optimize the stability in curve input. These changes aim to expand the operating window of the car and give more confidence to the pilots, but the initial results were not conclusive enough to reverse the deficit. And the most worrying came with the official announcement of Fred Vasseur after the Belgium Grand Prix. There would be no more important updates for the rest of the season. This decision sealed the fate of SF25 as it is, making it clear that what they have now is what they will have until the last Grand Prix of the year. This scenario creates an added voltage within the equipment. For Leclerc, it is an opportunity to maintain its advantage, taking advantage of the accumulated knowledge of a car that dominates better than anyone. For Hamilton, it is a counter-relage career. It must adapt to a car with fixed limitations and extract as much as possible before those shortcomings definitely move it away from the struggle for the title. But there is also a strategic factor. If Ferrari begins to prioritize minor evolutions or setup settings thinking about Lewis's style, the performance gap between them could narrow much before what Charles wants, and the Achilles heel of the SF25 Achilles could be transformed into the weapon that tilt the internal battle in favor of the British. In the first races of this season, Hamilton has rarely represented a direct threat to Charles Leclerc in terms of pure result, but that does not mean that the balance is fixed. What we have seen in just a few great prizes is a pattern that is usually repeated with pilots such like Lewis. A start with ups and downs, a thorough observation period of the car, and suddenly, a qualitative leap that completely changes the internal dynamics of the team. The coming duel will not be fought solely in the time leaves. It will be a constant psychological battle. In a team like Ferrari, where the media pressure is relentless and each internal movement is analyzed under the magnifying glass, the leadership is not measured only by who first crosses the goal, but also by whom it manages to attract towards itself the technical and strategic focus of the team. Leclerc knows that his current advantage comes in much of his deep knowledge of the SF25 and his ability to live with his defects without them having competitiveness. But he also knows that this advantage is fragile. If Hamilton gets engineers to interpret and prioritize their needs, they could start receiving a car that, while still being competitive for Charles, lace much better with their driving style. In that scenario, each race would become a pulse through who manages to impose its development approach. It is not enough to be faster. It must be consistently demonstrated that your technical approach produces better results for the team. It is here where Hamilton's experience, forged in 2 decades of battles by championships, gives him an important psychological advantage. He knows how to influence development decisions, how to communicate with the team so that his sensations translate into concrete changes in the car, and, above all, how to maintain pressure on a partner without having to enter direct confrontations off track. If we add to this that the Italian fans and the press do not hesitate to generate narratives of first pilot and second pilot, depending on the recent results, the slightest Leclerc performance bump could feed a public perception that Hamilton is the strong man of the team. In short, what Leclerc is warning of his phrase that life will become more difficult is not a courtesy towards a world champion who has just arrived, but an implicit recognition that the battle that comes will be total, technical, strategic, mental, and political. Winning on the track will be important, but winning Maranello's heart and the absolute support of the factory will be equally decisive. And in that fight, both know that only one can leave as a true Ferrari leader in 2025. The situation that Ferrari lives in 2025 is, in many ways, a chapter that could mark a before and after in its recent history. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton has not simply been the incorporation of a pilot with 7 world championships. It has been the introduction of a change factor capable of altering the work culture, development philosophy, and, above all, the internal balance of a team that had been with clear leadership in the hands of Charles Leclerc. The warning that life will become more difficult is not a media resource to add drama, but an accurate diagnosis of what happens when a second pilot is not, in reality, a second pilot, but a champion with intact ambition and the ability to transform the course of a season. In this context, each race ceases to be an isolated event and becomes a link within a chain of influences that go far beyond the stopwatch. The decisions of tuning, the order in which the updates arrive, the way in which the telemetry data is interpreted, all this is a battlefield and a silent war for the control of Ferrari's technical narrative. If Hamilton manages to impose his footprint on the development of the SF25, even without overcoming Leclerc immediately on the track, he will be planting the seed for a medium-term supremacy. And if Leclerc wants to avoid it, he must not only gain races, but also constantly reaffirm that his style and needs are the most effective way to bring Ferrari to victory. And in that struggle, experience, technical communication capacity, and political influence within the team are weapons as important as pure speed. Ferrari, meanwhile, faces the dilemma of any team with 2 big names: how to extract the maximum potential from both without the internal rivalry erosion the cohesion of the team. But the history of Formula One shows that, sooner or later, a side is imposed. The outcome of this season could define not only the 2025 champion, but also the pilot around which the immediate future of the Scuderia will turn.